Hi, scholars, and welcome to your first e-learning lesson. This is day 63, and this is the Q1 synthesis essay number 1, part 1. And it's actually a continuation of what we already started with that Q1 that we began before spring break, but here is that continuation. On today's lesson, we're going to do a couple of things, starting off with those literature study journal checks. If you have not done those so far, you'll need to do those. Then we're going to do a little refresher over the Q1 synthesis essay, and then finally get into the Q1 number 1 planning phase. Starting with those literature study journal checks, make sure that you submit your links to all 3 of those assignments in Canvas. Follow the instructions carefully. If you submit the wrong link or the wrong response, you may not earn credit, so be very careful there. Go ahead and do this now before moving on to anything else in this lesson. Just pause the video, head back out to Canvas, open up all 3 of those Lit Study Journal checks, numbers 3, 4, and 5, and submit each one as instructed. All right, now that you've finished up submitting those journal checks, thank you for that. I'll get those scored. Let's do a little refresher over that Q1 essay since it has been a while since we looked at it, over a week. So back before spring break, we began our first Q1 synthesis essay of the year. If you recall, the subject of the prompt was all about wind farms, and the topic you were asked to write about was the most important factors in deciding whether to build a wind farm. If you were absent for that day that we began this essay, that was day 62, as with all days you're absent, go ahead and complete the lesson on your own in Canvas. You can find it out there in modules under day 62. Since you don't have a copy of the prompt sheet, you'll need to either print a copy of your own or open it in Zoto, which is the PDF annotator app that you used for an assignment with the Q3 essay. Just go to zoto.com and that will open up the PDF annotator for you. And you must either print or use Zoto because it is required that you complete all of the brainstorming and planning stages on the prompt packet, and you have to demonstrate that you've completed all those steps. In fact, as I mentioned in my introduction video, you're required to submit something for every day of these mini e-learning lessons here. And so this will be something you have to submit to show that in order to earn attendance for today's lesson. So yeah, once again, you may not simply skip to the composing stage on the next couple of days. You will have to demonstrate that you have completed the brainstorming and the planning by turning in things to Canvas. All right, so we completed the brainstorming phase on day 62. That was steps 1 through 5 of the writing process. Yeah, here were those steps once again. First of all, we began by reading the prompt and marking the topic and claim. Then I had you create another mind map some ideas, that is before we read the sources. Next, read the sources, and we marked some key ideas from those sources. Then I had you go back and revise your mind map after reading the sources. And finally, at the end of class, I asked you to make a list of observations until you were sure of what you wanted to write about. At this time, I want you to go back through your work on this essay and make sure that you've completed the first 5 steps. Make sure that there is evidence that you've done all 5 of those things, as I will be checking for them when you turn in what you turn in at the end of this lesson. All right, thank you for completing that refresher. Now let's get into the next phase of the essay. After you finish brainstorming, it's time to start planning. Now we're going to continue with that planning phase, which goes a little something like this. Step 6, you'll compose a working thesis statement. Step 7, you'll outline your discussion. And step 8, an extra step that you haven't had before in planning, since this is the Q1 synthesis essay, another element of the planning process is you need to plan out how exactly you're going to use your sources. So make sure that as you work through this planning phase that you complete all work within the prompt packet itself, either on the printed copy you received in class or printed out for yourself, or you're always welcome to open up that PDF document in Zoto and use the online annotator. But before we get any work going on this planning process, it occurred to me as I was reading some of your Q3 essays over the break, and I actually noticed this a little bit when I was doing some conferencing with you guys. There was a number of you who, despite me telling you specifically not to do this, still tried to copy my examples and use them as your own. And so that was really annoying on a couple of levels because for one, when you do that, you're not actually demonstrating that you yourself have the skills to complete a Q3 task. When all you're doing is stealing my ideas and trying to show, all you're showing me is that you can copy my ideas. Two, there wasn't a single student who copied my ideas who did so successfully. It was clear that those weren't your ideas because you had no idea what you were even talking about. So make sure that you don't copy me on my samples with this particular essay. The samples are just for sample's sake to show you how it can be done. Do not copy exactly what I do here. Don't copy my wording. Don't copy my ideas. Please don't do that. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's take a look at the planning phase, starting with step 6, compose a working thesis. You want to make sure that that thesis is a defendable position on the topic or claim that you're given. Just like the Q3, you want to avoid vague wording, and also just like the Q3, make sure you're actually responding to the prompt that you're given. I did have a couple of students on that last Q3 who got very far into the essay. Some even finished the essay, only for me to tell them, hey, this doesn't actually respond to the prompt. You've forgotten what the prompt was, and they had to start all over again. So make sure that you're very specific and deliberate in responding to the prompt that you are given. Let's go ahead and take a look at a sample thesis here. Here's what I came up with. Wind farms are vital to helping curb the global climate crisis because they pose few risks to nature and public health while offering significant environmental and economic benefits. It's a great thesis. It's very clear. It's very detailed. But does this actually respond to the topic? Oh, wait, wasn't the topic something like to develop a position on the most significant factors that an individual or entity should consider when determining whether to build a wind farm? So no, this doesn't actually respond to the topic. Here, I've taken a position that wind farms are vital to combating the global climate crisis. That's not what I'm being asked to write about at all. What about something like this? Stakeholders must consider environmental, public health, and economic risks when choosing the location of a wind farm. Does this respond to the topic? Yes, most definitely. This is definitely explaining 3 very specific factors that an individual or entity must consider when deciding whether or not to build a wind farm. And just like I said in class, this is actually an easier idea to argue, and you can tell because look how much shorter and more concise the statement is of itself. All right. At this time, go ahead and go back to your Q1 prompt packet and create a working thesis. Somewhere in that packet, just make sure that you leave room to write your short outline after your thesis. All right. Once you have your thesis written, you'll need to plan out how you're going to develop that thesis. On the last essay, I asked you to try out the classical model, but I told you that was going to be the only time I was going to force you to do that. This time, I want you to develop your own organization strategy, but if you liked using the classical model and you felt it helped really develop your discussion in depth, please feel free to use it again. When you're developing your own organization strategy, really think about what it is you need to discuss and argue throughout your essay. Think about what order you should discuss or argue those ideas in, and at all times consider your reader and what your reader needs. All right, we get step 7. Step 7 is outline your discussion. On your prompt sheet, go ahead and create a rough outline beneath your thesis statement. For the intro, note what you plan to do with your hook. For the body paragraphs, note what you will discuss with each paragraph or each section. And then for the conclusion, note what you will discuss with your final thoughts, that so what question and how you're going to answer that. Here is my sample with my thesis there at the top. In my introduction, I want to tell a quick anecdote about driving through the wind farms in Southern California, and that will help get me into my thesis because it's just a vivid narrative that I can tell. And then with my next paragraph, I'm going to do kind of a narration sort of part where I'm going to acknowledge the necessity of wind energy. And the reason I'm doing that is rhetorical, is because most of my essay, since I'm examining the factors that individuals have to consider, I'm really examining the detriments. I'm examining the risks here, but I don't want my essay to come off as critical of wind power, because everyone knows that wind power is dramatically beneficial to the environment. So I want to acknowledge up front that wind energy is necessary, and that it is necessary to help fight global climate change and that sort of thing. And what that'll help me do is to kind of frame my analysis as, hey, this is a thing that has to be done, but when we're doing it, let's consider these things. So moving into my my second body paragraph, part 3 there, I'm going to start off by explaining the environmental damage concerns. Then with number 4, I'm going to get into the public health hazards. Then with number 5, I'm going to get into the economic costs and potential returns. And that's it. Then I'm going to get to my conclusion. My conclusion at the very end, I'm going to argue that wind energy requires less adjustment to our lives than an uninhabitable planet would. And so just kind of one final argument to show that despite all of these risks and considerations we have to take, that it's still more beneficial than the alternative. All right, at this time, go ahead and write your rough outline there beneath your thesis, making sure you leave some space to note the various sources that you're going to use in the next step. Okay, now that you know how your discussion is going to progress, it's time to figure out where you want to synthesize those sources. So you should have a pretty good idea of this already. After all, if you're doing this right, if you're approaching the Q1 properly, that source information should have informed your thesis and your outline. So you should have a pretty good idea already of where you want this stuff to go. So, step 8, go ahead and plan out your sources. Go back to your outline and add to it. Note which sources you will use in each paragraph, and briefly note what ideas you want to synthesize from those sources. Some helpful notes before you do this on using those sources. Make sure that you understand you don't need to reference sources in every paragraph. Some paragraphs can feature your arguments and your evidence only. Also, there's no need to artificially balance the number of sources you use in each paragraph. That's a purely arbitrary thing to do, that there's no requirement for having 2 sources here, 2 sources there, 2 sources. No, that's silly. Lastly, remember that sources should be used to enhance your argument. Your argument should be the focus of your essay. All right, here's my sample. You can see there in my second paragraph, my narration paragraph, I want you to draw a lot from source B, which talks about how wind energy is used and how it's currently only 1% of the energy grid, but how the rest of that is created by wasteful energy producers like coal and nuclear and that sort of thing. In paragraph number 3 there, I'm going to talk about those environmental damages and damage concerns, talk about more stuff from source B. In paragraph 4, I'm going to draw a lot from source C. Note how one of my ideas from source C, I put Cummings in parentheses. That means I'm going to talk about something that was quoted by Dr. Cummings. So I just wanted to note that that's coming from him and not from the author of source C. Then I get to paragraph 5, where I'm going to draw from source F, which is that lovely chart. And that's it. Those are my 3 sources, B, C, and F. No brownie points for going any more than 3. All right, at this time, go and add to your outline which sources you will use and what ideas you will reference. All right, scholars, that's it for this e-learning lesson. Make sure you turn in everything according to the instructions in Canvas so that I can score it properly and also so that I can give you credit for attendance.